When you move your mouse, press a key on your keyboard, touch a button on a screen or on a controller, you are sending an input to the computer. The program that you are currently using will receive this input and perform an action depending on the circumstances. One way that Roblox allows developers to detect input in their games is by using UserInputService. UserInputService has a variety of different uses ranging from detecting gamepads to some VR-specific functions. It is different from Context Action Service in that you don't have to bind a certain key to an action. It will fire whenever an input is detected. Before we begin utilizing UserInputService, you're going to want to add a local script to one of the locations that would be best suited for what you're designing. You can put the script in the starter player service within either starter character scripts or starter player scripts, but you could also place it inside of a GUI element in starter GUI or in a tool for a more specialized use. Now that we gotten that out of the way, let's get into using UserInputService in our scripts. To begin receiving input from UserInputService, you're going to want to define the service. At the top of your script, add a variable named something reasonable to remember. I normally use UIS for UserInputService, and set it equal to game getService UserInputService. GetService is the function that retrieves the service you need. It's good to declare services in this manner because they may not have been added once the game starts. Now that you've declared to the computer that you want to use UserInputService, you're going to want to use one of the events that UserInputService provides to detect for input. You can check out the API reference on UserInputService for all the different events that you can utilize, but I'm going to be using inputBegan and inputEnded as an example. We're going to need to set up two functions. You can set these up two different ways. You can create two functions above the events and then connect the events to the functions, or you can put functions inside of the connection. I'm going to go with the second option, but know that you can always do the first one. So for our first event, it will be inputBegan, so type your variable, add a period, then the event. To connect our event to a function, we'll use the connect function after the event to connect it to a function. Now we'll add an enclosed function. To do this, you'll want to type function and then press enter. If it doesn't already add an end statement to the function, you'll need to add it. There are two values received from the inputBegan and inputEnded events. An input object that holds information on what type of input was received, and a gameProcess event. The gameProcess event is a bool value that tells you whether the game engine observed this input and acted on it. This value returning true is usually common when a player clicks on a user interface element. To receive these values, we'll need to add two variables to our enclosed function's parentheses. I'm going to be using input and gameProcess event for the two variable names for consistency reasons, but you can name them however you like. We have completed the framework for our function, so let's add some actions inside of the function to determine what input was received. To see what key was pressed, we can use our input variable to access the property inside of it called keyCode. Let's add a print statement to print what value was pressed. Go over to test and press play to observe what type of values the inputBegan function is receiving. Now that we know the script is receiving input, we can check to see if a certain key was pressed. Add an if statement to your function and check to see if the input's keycode is equal to a specific key value. Keycode values are stored in the enum.keycode properties. For our example, I'm going to use enum.keycode.f. After adding the if statement, I can then make it perform an action inside of the statement. For now, I'm just going to keep it simple and just make it print a statement once the key F is pressed. After you finish with adding actions, you can go over to test and try out your new code. The inputEnded function works in the same way as inputBegan, so you can copy over your inputBegan function to an area below it and just change the event name to inputEnded. Now that you've learned a little about the UserInputService, you can use it to make your game more interesting with a variety of input options.